the methods of heat transfer. Okay, the methods of heat transfer. We say that heat is energy that transfers or moves into an object's thermal energy. Or heat means it is energy that moves between objects. Heat only flows or transfers always from a hotter object to a cooler one. Always remember that heat
أنا ياسر
flows.
يوسف.
أهلا ليث. Heat flows or transfers from a hotter object to a cooler object. And there are three methods or three ways by which heat transfers: convection, conduction, and radiation. طيب. The first way or the first method is conduction. طبعا هذول الways please listen. These ways are natural. يعني مش انه احنا people do this. They happens naturally by nature. ماشي. It is conduction, the transfer of heat between two objects or two substances that are in direct contact. Okay? At this page, in this page, look at this example. Here, heat transfers from the metal to the hot dog by conduction. Notice that they are in direct contact. Also, heat moves from the campfire here to the metal by conduction. They are in contact. طيب. Conduction happens or occurs mostly in solids because the particles in solids are close together. And the closer together the molecules in a substance, the better they conduct heat. This is why conduction works well in some solids like metals. طيب. By the way, and I want you to know that some types of solids do not conduct heat. مين بيقول لي what we call these types? Solids or materials that,
Insulators.
yes, solids are solids or materials that do not allow heat to pass through it. Okay, these types of materials are called insulators, like for example the oven mitt. تعرفوا الاوفن ميت اللي هو المساك اللي بتكون ماما تستخدمها بالمطبخ مثلا، وهي بدك تمسك البريق وهو حامي، او الطنجره بتستخدم الاوفن ميت. ليش؟ because the oven mitt is an insulator. Heat can't flow through it. Okay. طيب. The other way by which, but other types of solids like metals are excellent conductors. Examples of metals: iron, gold, copper, nickel. All of these are metals. The second way by which uh, heat flows or moves, it is convection. Convection happens mainly in fluids. What is the meaning of fluids? Liquids and gases. Now, what happens in convection? The heat moves. It is convection is the transfer of heat by the movement of the fluid. The particles always, the particles of a gas or the particles of a liquid like water, when they gain heat, they move very fast, and they get more farther from each other, and they become less dense. When air or water, whatever, any liquid or any gas gains heat, the particles move faster. Then this part of the liquid or this part of the gas becomes less dense and it floats. It's go up. The colder air or the colder liquid sinks down, it gains heat again, then it becomes less dense and float, and so on. It's like a cycle. We call them convection currents. Convection currents. Okay. And the last way by which heat transfer happens, it is radiation. Radiation, it is the transfer of heat or energy by electromagnetic waves. Okay? Radiation is the transfer of heat or energy by electromagnetic waves. The energy is transferred from the sun to earth is radiation. Example, the energy that comes from the sun or transferred from the sun to the earth is an example of radiation. Also, in this example, the heat can transfer from the campfire to the marshmallow directly by radiation. Okay,
Dad, can I ask a question?
yes, you can.
Um, if there's a metal in a liquid and the liquid is hot, is this
Yes.
convection or conduction?
يعني you mean suppose that we have, for example, a pot of water like this,
Yeah, and there's
and
like a
inside it a steel,
yeah.
okay, and it is surrounded by water. طيب, what do you think? The heat will move after for example, if the liquid, when the liquid gets hot, heat will transfer to the metal or the iron by conduction,
Okay.
okay, because they are in contact. يعني لما يكون قطعة الحديد بالنص هون مثلا, of course, heat will move from the liquid to the solid by conduction.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, good question. طيب. Now, how heat transfer or the heat transfer at air surface. First, as I told you yesterday, احنا حكيناها هاي الصفحة صح؟
Oh,
أول شيء, the sun's radiation or sun's energy is transformed, يعني changed at air surface into heat, into thermal energy. يعني energy that comes from sun, energy that comes from sun is transformed or changed at air surface into thermal energy. This will cause the ground, the surface of Earth, the surface may get warmer than air above it, or the ground gets warmer. As you know, air doesn't conduct heat well. Okay, so only the first few centimeters of the troposphere or of the ground are heated by conduction from air surface to the air. Sorry, again, يعني the first few centimeters of the air or the troposphere are heated by conduction from the air surface like this. This is the ground or air surface. This is the sun. Energy comes from sun to the earth surface by radiation. Okay, so this is a heat transfer by radiation. Okay, then the surface of the earth or the ground becomes warm. It conducts heat to the air that is closer to the surface, or to the troposphere that is closer to the surface. The heat transfer in this way by conduction. Heat moves or flows from the surface to the air that is closer to the ground by conduction. What happens then? Then the air that gets warmer floats, and the colder air sinks, and so on. The hot air floats, and the colder air sinks, and so on. So when the ground level air, what is the meaning ground level air? The air that is closer to the ground warms up, its molecules move more rapidly, and they bump into each other, and they move farther apart, بصيروا أبعد عن بعض أكثر, making the air less dense. And as you know, anything that is less dense will float. The warmer air that is less dense, okay, the warmer air which is less dense rises, and cooler air that is denser sinks toward the surface and the cycle repeats. Look, the cool air then gets warmed by the surface and the cycle continues, as I told you. This is the way by which heat transfers in the heat transfer at Earth's surface. Okay. In some areas, if the source of heat is isolated in one place, convection current can develop. This occurs in Earth's atmosphere as a result of radiation, conduction, and convection working together. طيب. Now, the horizontal movement of the air is called wind. Inshallah, later يعني in lesson 2 and lesson 3 we are going to talk about wind in more details. طيب. طيب هون خلينا نروح على السؤال هذا. حكيناه أتوقع. طيب. lesson check الآن. مين بيقدر يحكي يقرأ لي السؤال هذا ويجاوبه؟ على فكرة it's very easy.
Me, can I answer the first one?
Me.
تفضل نسرين يلا.
Convection, conduction, and radiation.
Yes. What are the three types of heat transfer? What are the three types of heat transfer that occur on Earth? It's very simple.
Conduction, and radiation.
Right, please write the answer. Conduction, convection, and radiation. These are the three methods of heat transfer: conduction, convection, and radiation. طيب. If the amount of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane continue to increase in the atmosphere. As you know that carbon dioxide and methane...
Can I answer this?
Wait, both of them are called greenhouse gases. If their levels or if their amounts in the atmosphere are increasing, what will happen to the average temperature of Earth? يلا ليث تفضل.
If these gases kept increasing,
Yes.
the temperature will be hot.
The average
يعني
temperature of Earth will continue to increase.
the average will,
Why?
it will be hot because these gases, I don't know why, but they heat up.
Me.
طيب. Thank you ليث. خلينا نسمع على محمود سواعي. تفضل محمود.
Regulations.
محمود تفضل. Do you have any comment or any question or you like to answer?
Yes, I would like to answer.
Yes, you can. تفضل. شكرا ليث على فكرة. Thank you ليث. كمل محمود تفضل.
I think it will make holes in the atmosphere and more UV rays would reach the earth.
يعني they make holes in the atmosphere. طيب good. Also, these gases, carbon dioxide and methane, can trap heat. For this reason, they are called the greenhouse gases. These two gases, carbon dioxide and methane, are able to trap heat, to catch heat that is reflected from the earth, like this. Suppose that this is, as you know, the air surface reflects some of the energy. These gases trap the heat. They are good if they are in certain levels, in normal levels. But if they increased in the atmosphere, what will happen? They can trap more and more heat, and this will cause an increase or a large increase in the average temperature of the earth, which is called the greenhouse effect. راح ابعث لكم هذا الجواب هون later ان شاء الله. Question 2. I will send you the answer ان شاء الله later. الآن خلينا skip question 3 راح ابعث لكم اياه بعدين، بده شرح كثير، بس خلينا نشوف هذا السؤال. You place a metal، على فكرة سؤال حلو. You place a metal spoon in a pot of soup. يعني هذا كأنه نفس السؤال اللي سألته نسرين. You place a metal spoon in a pot of soup. After a few minutes, you touch the end of the spoon and notice that it is hot. Which type of heat transfer caused this to happen? Raise your hands and explain. Again, you place a metal spoon in a pot of soup. شوربة عدس. مش شرط يعني تكون عدس طبعا. After a few minutes, you touch the end of the spoon and notice that it
Can
is
I
hot.
answer?
طيب عمرو تفضل.
Conduction, because
Conduction.
like
محمود سواعي, are you agree with him?
Yes.
عشان شفتك كنت تجاوب. Thank you عمرو, thank you محمود. That's right. Conduction. على فكرة نفس السؤال سألته نسرين نفس طريقة ثانية. Yes, the metal spoon gets hot because of conduction. Heat moves from the soup to the spoon by conduction, not by convection and not by
Can
radiation.
I answer the next one?
I want to explain, wait, because the two objects, the spoon and the soup, here we have two objects, soup and the spoon. Which one of them is hotter? The soup. So heat will move from the soup to the spoon. Why by conduction? Because they are in direct contact. Also, in solids like the spoon, heat moves by conduction, not by convection. Conduction works best in solids because the particles can't move from place to place like in convection, like convection. طيب. The last question, read it ليث يلا.
Okay. What causes sunburn and why do we have difficulty perceiving the energy that causes it? I'll answer the first part only. What causes sunburn? The layers of the ozone that يعني هسه greenhouse effect causes holes in the ozone layer. So some of the harmful rays will come to Earth and it may cause harmful diseases.
Excellent. The sunburn and other skin diseases in general, sunburn and other problems, health problems, are caused by the harmful rays that came from the sun or that come from the sun, like ultraviolet radiation, infrared. That's right. Why do we have difficulty perceiving the energy that causes it? Because these types of waves or these type of light are they have a high frequency and high energy. They can penetrate or enter your skin. So your body is not able to deal with these types of waves. طيب الآن we finish this lesson إن شاء الله. I will send you the answers. الكتاب مش معي, الكتاب التيتشر اديشن مش معي حتى ابعث لكم اياهم, بس مثلا ان شاء الله راح ابعث لكم احنا جاوبناهم, بس راح ابعث لكم الجواب اصور لكم اياه يوم الاحد ان شاء الله. الان I want to show you a video about conduction, convection and radiation, but wait a minute, I want to turn on the video. خليكم معي, بس I want to find the video. Okay? Done?
Yeah.
طيب. بسم الله. شو أخذتوا الحصة الأولى؟
عربي
أخذتوها 45 دقيقة ولا نص ساعة؟
45 دقيقة. لا
نص
هي
ساعة،
أعطتنا
نص
إياها
ساعة.
نص ساعة.
لا أخذناها نص ساعة.
مين
أعطتني
درسكوا
إياها
لغة
نص ساعة.
عربية؟
بس نجوى.
طيب خلينا نشوف. خلينا شوي بس. طالع بسم الله. Let me share the screen. احكوا لي إذا كان واضح أو لا. أو الصوت بقطع. فتح عندكم ولا لا؟
فتح أستاذ.
يلا. صوت واطي صح؟
شيء يا أستاذ واضح.
كثير.
Good.
تقدر تعليه؟
خذ أعلى إشي. Look, heat is the transfer of energy. This is the meaning of heat. It is the transfer of energy from objects of different temperatures. يعني someone of the warmer than the other. As objects warm up or cool down, their kinetic energy changes. As you know, when the object warms up, its kinetic energy or kinetic energy increases. If the object cools, its kinetic energy decreases. So heat is the transfer of energy from objects of different temperatures. طيب.
Kinetic energy changes. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion. Temperature is a measure of the average kinetic energy of the particles in an object. As temperature increases, the energy of motion decreases. As the
هو
water
صوته
warms
واطي
up
الفيديو نفسه.
and the temperature increases, you can see an increase in the movement. Heat can be transferred in at least three ways: conduction, convection, and radiation. Conduction is a process in which the transfer of heat takes place between objects by direct contact. It is most often associated
Now, did you listen hear that in direct contact, like the pizza and the metal here. طيب.
with solids. The key to conduction is direct contact. The heat of the pan is transferred to the many pieces. The energy of the frying pan is transferred to the eggs. Notice that they are in direct contact. Convection is heat transferred by the movement of a fluid such as air or water. When the heated fluid is caused to move away from the source of heat, carrying the energy with it, it occurs due to density. Lava lamps are examples of convection. As the liquid is heated, it rises and falls. As it heats, it cools. As the paper burns, the air is heated up and begins to rise. The burning paper is swept up in the convection current, cools, and falls back down.
ليش طارت هاي؟ مين بيعرف؟
ايش يا أستاذ؟
ليش هاي طارت لفوق؟ ليش طلعت لفوق؟ شنو صار؟
because
صارت less dense.
mosquitoes are اوكي فكرت mosquito.
These beans are another example of convection. As the beans warm up, they rise and then cool and fall back down. And repeat this over and over again. Radiation heat is transmitted without any physical contact between objects.
Without contact.
Watch how the temperature of the lamp is transferred to the thermometer without touching it.
Notice that the thermometer,
Alligators
look, this is, استنى شوي. Here,
these
the heat here transferred to the thermometer by radiation without contact. Notice that the temperature increased. That means it gains heat.
alligators and lizards use radiation from the sun to warm their bodies. If you'd like to know more about heat transfer and conduction, convection, and radiation, this playlist will help. And as always, thanks for watching.
طيب.
Math uploads a new math and science video every day.
استنى خلينا نشوف فيديو ثاني يكون الصوت أوضح شوي على السريع.
تحتاج هذه المدن لإعادة تصميمها بشكل جذري. كيف سيبدو الأمر لو تخلينا عن السيارات، لو استغنينا عن الشوارع؟
طيب
Whenever an object is heated, energy is transferred to its thermal energy store, and its temperature increases. The process of heating, though, can take place in three different ways, depending on the medium in which.
صوت أوضح صح؟
For solids, heat is transferred by conduction.
نفس الشيء.
In fluids, it's via convection. And to get through empty space, heat has to be transferred in the form of radiation. Let's start with conduction. The key idea behind conduction is that vibrating particles transfer energy to neighboring particles. To understand how this works, let's imagine that you are heating one end of a piece of metal with a Bunsen burner. And imagine the piece of metal as a series of particles. As the end of the metal is heated, energy is transferred to the metal, or more specifically, is transferred to the kinetic energy store of the particles at that end. This causes the particles to vibrate faster, and so they collide with their neighboring particles more often, and with more energy. As the collisions transfer kinetic energy, the neighbors will also vibrate faster, and collide more with their neighbors. And as this process repeats, energy is passed along the piece of metal, until in the end, the heat is spread out evenly, and it will be pretty much the same temperature everywhere. Now, the reason that conduction occurs mainly in solids is because the particles in a solid are held together really closely, which means there's lots of collisions that pass on the energy. Whereas in liquids and gases, the particles are all further apart, and so they don't collide as much.
Now he is explaining why conduction happens best in solids, because the particles, as you see, are very close together. When this part, for example, of the solid gets warm, the particles move faster and they collide with each other and with the next particle. It's called collisions. Okay? طيب.
Exactly how well objects transfer energy by conduction is known as their thermal conductivity. Metals have a high thermal conductivity and transfer heat energy rapidly, whereas plastics have a low thermal conductivity, which is why we use them as insulators. And pretty much all fluids have a low thermal conductivity. Convection, on the other hand, occurs mainly in fluids. And remember, fluids can refer to anything that can flow, so both liquids and gases. Because the particles in fluids aren't fixed, once they're heated and they gain kinetic energy, they all move around faster. By the process of random diffusion, this will cause these more energetic particles to move away from the warmer region towards the cooler region. And overall, this means that the higher energy particles in the warmer region are a lot more spread out than those in the cooler region. So effectively, the fluid in the warmer region actually expands as it heats up, and so becomes less dense than the cooler fluid. To understand how this works in real life, let's imagine that we had a container of fluid. So that could be either
سامعين يا
liquid or
شباب؟
gas. As we heat the container,
شيء صراحة.
things would happen. First, the particles near the heat source would gain kinetic energy and spread out, becoming less dense. Because they're less dense, these particles rise above the colder, less dense particles above them. And at the same time, these cooler particles sink down and take their place. Whilst this is happening though, the hot particles will lose their energy and cool down, and the cool particles now at the bottom would heat up. Because of this, the cycle would keep on repeating for as long as the fluid was being heated, and we call this cycle a convection current. We actually see these convection currents all over the place, from oceans to inside buildings, where radiators warm the nearby air and set off the cycle. On the other hand, to reduce convection, we need to stop the free conduction and convection have in common is that they both involve particles gaining kinetic energy. It's just that in conduction, only the energy is transferred between the different particles, whereas in convection, the particles themselves move.
Notice this is a comparison between conduction and convection. In conduction, only the energy is transferred between the particles, but the particles themselves do not move because it happens in solids. Again, in conduction, energy is transferred but the particles do not move. The energy only transferred. But here in convection, energy is transferred between particles, and the particles themselves move. The particles themselves move in the fluid.
However, heat energy can also be transferred without particles, which means it could travel through a vacuum. This happens when energy is transferred by radiation, and specifically,
Look, in radiation, energy transferred without particles. No need to particles, no need to medium. It can travel through a vacuum.
when the energy is carried by infrared waves. All objects constantly absorb and emit radiation, and in reality, they do both at the same time. Importantly, the hotter the object is, the more radiation it emits. This is why it feels hot to put your hand over a barbecue, even if you're not touching it. The very hot metal and coal is emitting infrared.
Look here, is this person touching the fire? No, but he gets warm because of radiation. Did you know that your body emits radiation? Your body emits radiation.
Red radiation, which is absorbed by your hand. We take a closer look at it. The very hot metal and coal is emitting infrared radiation, which is absorbed by your hand. We take a closer look at infrared radiation when we cover the electromagnetic spectrum. Anyway, that's all for today. So hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time.
طيب, is it good?
Yes.
استفدتوا من الفيديوز؟
Yes.
Whenever an object is heated,
طب خلينا نخلص وخلاص.
to
طيب.
its thermal.
Okay. Do you have any question, شباب؟ في حدا عنده comment أو question؟
أستاذ
No,
تفضل.
thank you.
ضايل عنا قديش للميتينج وقت؟ 3 minutes. خلينا بس نحكي شوي وبعدين خلاص. بس بدي أشوف إذا حدا عنده سؤال أو عنده comment. تفضل.
نص ساعة.
إيش يا زيد بدك تحكي؟
بحكي مش المفروض الحصة تكون نص ساعة ولا 40 دقيقة، أنا مش عارف يعني.
لا خلاص في حدا ودالكم الحصة اللي بقى هسه في عندكم بريك؟ لا مش بريك. خلاص خلصت الحصة، بس شوف لي شو بدك. اللي حاب يطلع من ميتينج يطلع.
Okay, bye, man.
يلا
أستاذ.
جود باي. ايش يا ليث؟ وين راح ليث؟ طلع كأنه. طيب يلا جود باي.
Goodbye.
جود باي، سي يو ان شاء الله.